Hey everyone, in this tutorial we're going to be making a procedural chain or rope system within the Godot Engine. To do this, we're going to be using a combination of rigid body 3D nodes and some 6 degrees of freedom joints that are going to make this all possible. The first thing that we need to create is our actual chain scene. This will be a node 3D root, and we're going to call this dynamic chain. Within this, we're going to add a static body 3D node. That's going to act as our anchor. In fact, let's go ahead and name this anchor. This is what the chain and rope are going to attach to, and this doesn't move, hence why it's static. Then we're going to add another child node to our dynamic chain root, and this is going to be just a basic node 3D, and this will be our link container. This is where we're going to generate all of our rigid bodies and our joints, and it's going to create that chain or that rope. You can go ahead and save this, and we'll call this a dynamic chain. Now we're going to create a script for this that's going to do all of the heavy lifting. So select our dynamic chain root, and we're going to make a new script. Add this to our scripts folder, and we'll call this dynamic chain. And let's take a look at what we're doing here within this script. We'll go ahead and clear all of that. And the first thing we need to do is make this a tool script. So I wanted to be able to manipulate these chains and change how they look within the editor. So the tool script, it just means that this script can run in the editor, not just in the game. We're going to add a class name. We'll call it dynamic chain. Going to extend our node 3D, and then we need to add some of our export variables. The first 3 that we're going to add are the link count, and I've written this all in the context of a chain, but a link is just a piece of rope. If you're doing a rope, we have our link count. That's how many pieces that are within our chain, within our rope, the length of each link, and then the radius of that link. So when we're doing a rope, we're actually going to generate those meshes procedurally, and our chain, we can add our own custom mesh. Then we need to get a couple of references to the different parts of our scene over here. I like to just do an export, so I can set that in the inspector over here. And so if you're doing an onReady, you just do an onReady, you get your variable, and then you're going to have to set that manually by dragging over that node. We're going to switch these to export variables, clear those, save that, and then we can just assign those by hand. So we'll get a reference to our anchor, and then we get a reference to the node that's going to contain all of our links. Next, we're going to set up our ready function, and this is just going to run our generate chain function, which we haven't created yet. In fact, let's go ahead and add that right under here, and we'll just have pass there for now. We'll fill that in a little bit. Engine is editor hint. That just means that we're running this in the editor. So this means if we're not running in the editor, generate chain. Basically what the generate chain function is going to do is it's going to run another function the set number of times that we decide via our link count. This is going to come within the create link function. So every time that we run this function, we're going to create a new rigid body 3D node, and then we're going to have a couple of settings for our mass, gravity scale, our linear dampening, and our angular dampening. Next, we need to create the actual mesh. Now to start off here, we're just going to create our rope. And so we're going to generate that cylinder mesh dynamically. So after we set the physics properties of our rigid body, we're going to create a new mesh instance 3D node. And within that, we're going to create a new cylinder mesh. Now all that really is, and I'll show this over here, we're just going to create a mesh instance, and then we're creating that mesh here. And that cylinder mesh is just that option. So we're just doing this via our script instead of doing it by hand. And then this is where some of our export variables come into play. So the cylinder height, the height of that mesh, is going to be the length of our link. The radius will be the link radius that we set, and the same thing for our bottom radius. Then we set our mesh instance to that cylinder mesh that we create, and then we add that to a child of our rigid body 3D node. Now in order for a rigid body to actually work as a physics object, we need to have a collision shape. So that'll be the next thing that we add. So underneath our visual mesh, we create our collision shape. So the collision shape is going to be a collision shape 3D, and that's going to be another cylinder shape 3D. And the same settings apply for the height, the radius, and then we apply that shape to the collision shape and add that collision shape node as a child to the rigid body. We're going to be editing the generate chain function to fill that out. But before we do that, we need to add a couple of array variables. So we'll go up here to the top under our export variables, and I'm going to paste in here what I've got, and that is a links variable, which is an array of rigid body 3D nodes, and a joints variable that we're going to be using for all of our joints. Right now, we're just looking at the links array, and this is what's going to hold all of the links that this create link function creates. So let's take a look at our generate chain function. The first thing that we want to do is clear any existing chain that we might have. Because we're going to be refreshing this within the editor sometimes, we want to make sure we're starting fresh. We check if we have any existing link chains within our links array, and if we do, we're going to get rid of those. We're going to queue free, and then we'll clear our links and our joints array. And then if we have any nodes within our link container, we also want to get rid of those. So that makes sure that we're starting from fresh over here in our scene. After we've done that, we can generate our new links. So for I and our range of 10, each link we're going to create a link using our create link function. We're going to add that link to our link container and append it to our links array. And here's where we're creating that offset for our position. We're just taking whatever number chain we're on and adding 1 to it, because we always start at 0, and making it negative. So we're moving it down by the length of our link. Now we can actually test this right now if we get rid of all of that and just run our generate chain function when we're ready. And we'll run our game, and you should see all of our little cylinders fall right down. Now, in order for this to actually work like a physics rope or chain, we need to use physics joints. And the joint of choice is going to be the 6 degree of freedom joint. The very first joint is actually going to attach to our anchor. And then every joint after that is going to attach to each individual link that we create. Now, in our case, for the chain or the rope, we're going to actually lock our linear movement. So we don't want any stretching to occur. And we're just going to keep our angular movement. Let's head back to our script. We're going to create another function after our create link function. This is just going to take our body A and then our body B. Usually both of these will be a rigid body except for the very first case. That's why this is a node 3D, so it could be either static body or a rigid body. And then we're going to create that joint as a generic 6 degree of freedom joint 3D. Create new, we'll name it as a joint to whichever body we're doing. And we're going to set the position of that to the link length that we've set. We're going to multiply that by 0.5. So that'll put the joint at the very end of our link that we create. Let's go ahead and set our linear and our angular limits. Now this is going to look like a lot of code, but it's just going back in here and setting these values within our X, Y, and Z. So first we'll do our linear movement. This is going to lock the X axis, Y axis, and the Z axis. After that, we can set our angular limits, and this is where we're going to get our chain and rope feel. So we want to make sure we have an angular limit set to true. And this is for our X, our Y, and our Z. And for each one of these, we're going to make sure that we have the angular limit set to true. And then we're going to set a lower limit and an upper limit. And we're going to set that using an angular limit that we set. And note for the Y, we're actually setting it to a twist limit. So if you look at a rotation of this, that X rotates like this, Z rotates like that, and the Y is almost like you're twisting the chain or the rope. Now, a chain won't twist entirely, and a rope would twist pretty minimally. So that's why we have a different value for our angular and our twisting. Now we need to connect our node A and node B. So we'll do that at the very end of our function. And we're using the parameters that we're sending here, our body A and our body B. Now there's a timing thing that we need to talk about right here and why we're using the ready function. So what we're doing here is we're connecting our ready function to this custom function that we're creating. And this custom function is combining our node A and our node B. So now that we have this function, we need to actually run it when we generate our chain. So we'll go back up to our generate chain function, and at the very end of it, after we create our links, we're going to do a couple of things. First, we're going to wait for all of the links to get in the tree. So we're waiting for the process frame signal. And once that emits, which emits immediately before the process function, that's when we're going to create our joints. So within the range of whatever our link count is, we're going to get the body A, which we'll set to our anchor if it's the first run of the loop. Else, we're going to set it to one of the links in our links array right here. And then we add that joint as a child and then append that joint into our joints array. So now that we're creating our joints, we can actually test this and everything should stay connected, just like that. So let's go back up to the top and we're going to be adding some more export variables. We'll add these right under our chain setup and we're going to set options for our angular limit, our twist limit, and then our link mass, gravity scale, and link damping. We'll go down to our create link and let's use these new export variables. Link mass for that. We use our gravity scale for that, our link damping for this, and then our link damping for that too. If you want to set different damping settings for angular and linear, you totally can. Although remember, we're not moving anything on our linear scale. And then in our create joint, we'll swap these so we're not setting them in our function because that's not really a good practice. We're going to set these in our export variable. We'll swap that with our angular limit radian and twist limit radian setting, and that will be what passes into our joint settings. Now, it would be really cool to be able to adjust this on the fly in the editor, and we can do that with some changes to our script. So we'll go into our chain script, and we're going to be editing our export variables so that when we make changes to these in the editor, it's going to regenerate the chain or the rope so we can see those changes live in the editor. Just having a normal export variable is not going to let you do this. What we need to use is a setter. So let's go to our link count, and I'm going to replace this with some different code right here. So this part is the same, and then we add a set value. That's just the value that gets passed. We set our link count to that value, and then we can run some custom code. And what we're going to do is, if we're in the editor, we're going to run a regenerate chain function. Now, we don't have that yet, but we're going to be adding that in a second. In fact, let's do that now. So we'll go down to the bottom of our script. We're going to add a new function, regenerate chain. So if we're in the editor, we're going to do that same clearing, get rid of the trash that we have. So this is the exact same code that we had above, which we honestly should put in its own function because we're doing it twice. So let's actually do that. We're going to grab all of this and then let's create a new function, clear chain, paste that in there. And now we can just run that. And we can also do the same thing, replace that, clear chain. That's a lot cleaner. So clear chain, get rid of everything, start fresh. I'm going to wait for that all to occur, give it a frame, and then we'll run our generate chain function. So if we go to our dynamic chain and we adjust our link count, remember we're using a setter here, it's going to update live in the editor, which is pretty handy. And we can do this for any number of these settings. So let's do the same thing for our link length. Go here, we're going to get rid of this. We're going to copy that, and then again, all I've done is use the setter here, link length equals the value. If we're in the editor, regenerate the chain. And same thing for the link radius. And what this is going to let us do is customize our rope, as it were, with these settings. We can change our radius. We can do it live in the editor. Pretty cool. Go test that out. Have a really ugly looking rope. So it's a pretty handy way to do these ropes and chains on the fly. Make sure it fits the level that you need. Now you'll notice that when we run into it, we're not getting the effect that we want. And that's because we need to adjust some of our collision settings. So if you look at the player controller that we have set up here and go down to the collision settings, you'll notice these two options. So we have a layer and we have a mask, and we have all of these bit flags that we can set up. And we don't have anything complicated. This is actually not set up how we should have it set up. In fact, let's go ahead and name these out. So 1 could be environment, 2 could be player, and so that means player needs to be on this one, and we should mask the environment. So the player is stopped by the environment. Now we can do the same thing for all of the rigid bodies that we make. Now a rigid body is going to have those same settings. So we can add those via some export variables. So let's go down here and go underneath our physics properties. We're going to add some more export. It's going to be in a collision group, and we're going to add a special export. This is a export flags 3D physics. And then our link collision layer, we'll set that to 1, which is just environment. And the mask for environment, we'll adjust that in our settings. But you'll notice that we have those popping up right now in our inspector. Super, super helpful. Now what we can do is actually make a new layer, and we'll call this physics object. Okay, so any object that might be a physics object, we'll set that to that layer, and we'll collide with player. And then we need to set those when we create the link. So we'll go to our create link function where we're creating our rigid body, and we just need to set the link collision layer and the link collision mask right here. So let's run that. And now, because our rope is detecting our player and it's detecting the environment, when the player runs into it, we actually get the motion that we want, and it gets stopped by the wall there too. Now we actually have kind of a real rope going on. This is working because the player is not masking the physics object. So if I were to mask it with the player, that means it's going to stop the player's movement. Now, that might make sense if you're doing like a big giant boulder, then that's really should be handled in a different way anyway, but it's just a rope. So it really shouldn't stop your momentum. And by turning that mask off, that's how we get it to react in a much better and cooler way. Now, I did promise that we were going to be able to make a chain and not just a rope. So we need to make some changes again to how we're doing this. This is great if you just want to do it for a rope. You're set, you're good to go. Although this honestly might help you if you want to do your own type of rope, and that is by being able to use our own meshes instead of generating just a cylinder. We can do that pretty easily. So first, let's add, of course, some more export variables, and these are going to be using the setter function that we had done earlier. Let's go under our collision. We're going to add 3 more variables here. These are going to be mesh settings. First is a link mesh. And again, this is just setting the value if we're in the editor, regenerate the chain. Then we have a mesh scale in case you want to adjust the size of that mesh. And then we have an enumeration for chain and rope. So if you want to use the rope version or if you want to use the chain version. We'll save that, and we should have those show up here. Now let's go into create link. That's where we're creating our mesh, remember? After we do the rigid body, we're creating our mesh. We're going to adjust this so we can incorporate our custom mesh and decide whether we want to use that or our procedurally generated cylinder for our rope. So we'll take this, and I'm going to paste in here this amount right there. So custom or procedural for our mesh, create a new mesh instance. If it's a chain and we've actually set our link mesh variable, set the mesh to that mesh. If we're not doing a chain, then just do what we've been doing, which is the rope. And then one additional thing that we're going to be able to do is manually adjust the scale. Now your custom mesh may not be the exact size that you need, so that's going to allow us to adjust it. You wouldn't want a giant link in there and have to go back into Blender or something to change that. So we can adjust that with our mesh scale, and then we do our collision shape, which should still be a cylinder for all purposes. So I'm going to include just a basic chain link that I've created, and let's pop this in here into, I guess I don't have a folder for that. Assets, models, and let's make a props folder. So models, props, and then I'm going to drag this in there. So this is just a basic chain link that I created. Do notice that I did the 1, 2 just included in there, so I don't have to rotate them as much. And it's also a little bit longer. Not every link is its own individual rigid body. You can make this longer if you wanted to with your own mesh. Let's go ahead and pop that in there. Dynamic chain, link mesh, and load our chain link, and you should see it pop up right there. Pretty cool. And let's play around with some of this stuff. So our mesh scale, see how that changes how big that is. Let's get that into a nice reasonable size. And now that we've changed that, we need to change our length. Make that a little bit shorter and make it longer. And there you go. That's a pretty good chain. We'll save that and run it. And there's our chain. We can also run into it. I mean, that's looking like a chain. Looks pretty good. One last thing to do, just to make this as feature-filled as possible, is you can add something to the very end of the rope or the chain as an attachment. And then you can make this a light that swings, or maybe attach a box or something like that. It's pretty easy to add, so let's go ahead and do that. We're going to go back to the top, of course, and we're going to add another export variable. This one's going to be for a scene. So let's add another group here for attachment, attach the scene, and save it. The only thing that we need to do is whenever we're done with our chain, whenever we've generated all the links and all the joints, we're just going to add one more thing. And we can do that in the very end of our generate chain. So we're going to our generate chain function and add this at the very bottom. And this is going to see if we have an attached scene, if we have any links, and then get our attached scene instantiated and add it as a child of our link container. Then we get the very bottom link within our link array, and then we set the global position of our attachment around that bottom link global position. Finally, if this is a rigid body and we want this to act like a physics object, then we create a new joint and attach it to the bottom link. Now I've gone ahead and created just a basic hanging light, nothing fancy. It's a rigid body and the root, and then a mesh, and we added a light to it, and I've attached it to our rope. You can see if we adjust the size of our rope here, it takes the attachment with it. And if we go into our game here and test it out, and we hit our attachment, you'll notice that it works like a hanging light. So that's our dynamic chain and rope setup. You can grab the source files for this on my Patreon, and as always, keep creating.